know that today's session is brought to you by our friends from the Shift Agency. The Shift is a disruptive sustainability agency working with the world's largest sports events, corporate and non-profit industries. They aspire to be architects of a better tomorrow, design better solutions for people and ecosystems, empower young talents into action, and innovate in ways that make business sense. I will now pass on the floor to my co-founder, Xuan Ming, who will introduce you to the dynamic duo from the Shift. Ming, all to you.
Thank you, Neo. To introduce our friends from the Shift International, Geert, Hendriks, several co-founder and chief engagement officer of the Shift. In fact, we have he is also the founding director some previous of sport and sustainability, and so it's lovely to see you again. An international lawyer with 20 years of experience, Ingrid Beutler is the legal and integrity director at the Shift. She also co-founded the Sustainable Mountain Alliance, an organization that facilitates the transition to sustainable sports and tourism in the mountain environment. So thank you both so very much for joining us today and for being willing to share your knowledge on this incredibly vast topic. Since this is such a complex topic, I would like to just go straight away and look to our experts to help us frame the question of what is sustainability?
That sounds very good. Thank you very much, Ming, and thank you, IGNITX, for the invitation to talk. It's always a pleasure to talk and to work with you guys, and happy to be back after last year, even with my colleague Ingrid on this. We're going to address the topic in different ways. Firstly, we'll be talking a bit through some of the concepts and the things, depending on those, whether or not they have experience. So we'll showing you a few slides on what is sustainability, how does it actually function in the areas of sports or function areas. We're going to have a bit of fun, hopefully. That's always important when we do something like this. So we're going to do some quizzes and test a little bit your understanding and also your opinion on some of the topics. And we will make sure we leave at the end enough time to go into some of the difficult questions, the challenging topics, and anything that you would like us to go more in detail in. So what I will do is I will share my screen and I'll talk you through a couple of points first. And so while this is loading, we're kind of talking about sustainability, but we're zooming in on climate change more particularly, so on that side. And actually, we'll kind of want, I think, a couple of minutes here because we already had a wonderful introduction about the Shift, who we are, what we do, also a young agency based out of Lausanne, but working kind of across the globe. So I'm going to skip over this slide and we go straight into the content. And actually, the point is not that it's just Ingrid and myself who are going to be talking. So I would like you all to get out your mobile phone and to scan the QR code, because I want to ask you a few questions. So you have 15 seconds to scan this QR code, and then I'm asking you to respond to the questions that you see on your screen. Because before we throw definitions and concepts at you, I would like to know what you think. I think I see we're like more than 20 people. So I would like to understand what you think is sustainability. So there's 3 options here that you will see on your phone. Is it the responsibility to conserve natural resources? Is it meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future? Or is sustainability conducting a sport event that uses environmentally friendly methods to reduce the negative impact on the environment? I let you choose, and I'll give you probably 5 seconds to choose, and then I'll switch to the results. I can see that several people are already very convinced about what sustainability is. About 50% talks about conserving natural resources. 1/3 talks about looking after the resources you need, and 13% thinks the last one is the right answer. So you have 5 more seconds to make up your mind. I think there's like a few people that haven't voted yet. So 3, 2, 1. Ingrid, what's the right answer?
They're all arguably correct, but
Wonderful. No, we're not going to debate this along that, but actually it is there's truth in all of them. The common definition of sustainability is the one that has 38% of the points. That's Brundtland, that's the official definition used, which really puts this concept of balance forward, meeting the needs of current sport events, making sure you can run your sport event, but making sure you don't make any compromises and you are able to organize the sport event in the future or for future generations as well. So if I had to pick one that is probably most common, it's the one in pink here. Next question. If we talk sustainability, talking about currently, talking about the future, what is important for an event? On a scale of 1 to 10, sorry. If it's not important at all, you give a 0. If it's very important, you give a 10. Try to be explicit, don't put everything on a 5. Certain things are more important than other things. Why is sustainability important? Is it to avoid greenwashing? Is it to make sure your sponsors behave ethically? Is it to make sure there's a fair payment in professional women's football? For example, I should maybe say women's sport in general. Is it something that's related to minimizing food waste, public image? Or is it important for an event because when you're bidding for an event, sustainability is one of the key elements in your bid? Try to be what is more important for you. Again, there's no good or right answer on this one. It's more to get your opinion. This is clearly your opinion where you see sustainability plays a key role. Give you 10 seconds to read through them and make your choices. I think there's a clear preference here in the bidding side at the moment. Okay, 5 more seconds to make your choice. Again, it's an opinion. It's not necessarily good or bad, because the right answer is it plays a role in everything. It is important to everything. But it's important and interesting to see also for those of you who work maybe in the sector or who are involved in several other aspects of sport event management, that your perception is that if I simplify what we see here, that the side of managing risk of a bad public image is less important in the context of sustainability. But really when we talk about getting a bid approved, or kind of making sure it's included in your bid, that's a really important side. I'm not going to discuss this in great length, but I would say that the topic of public image greenwashing has a lot of weight at the moment for legal reasons, for sponsorship reasons, for branding purposes, etc. So it is something that currently is very much on the radar of us. For example, when we talk to sport event organizers about sustainability, we literally train spokespeople on this topic to make sure they know what to say and especially what not to say. So I don't know, Ingrid, if you want to make a 1 or 2 remarks on what you see here.
Thank you. And I'd just like to express my gratitude as well to IGNITX for inviting the shift and inviting us to be with you this afternoon, this morning, wherever you are in the world. It's very interesting, actually, the results of this to these questions, particularly with regards to the event bid, the fact that nearly 100% of you consider that sustainability is part of an event bid as being something very important. I'd love to have a follow-up question to that. Do the events that you work with, do they have sustainability as part of the contracts, as part of the conditions to bid for the event? Because when we're working globally, we work with, many of the major World Championships, the Olympic Games, a lot of the major events. Yes, they now have sustainability as part of the bid process, but not all events do. So those who are working with sports organizations who are in this call, would very much encourage your leadership to ensure that sustainability is part of the bid process. It is part of the documentation that it's required for the bidding for any event. And now we'll go just into some more detail with Geert with regards to what sustainability is. So reflecting, obviously, the feedback from the first question that was shared by Geert was, what is the definition of sustainability? For many people, it's only about the environmental side of things, the implications on nature, and it's much more than that. So, but I'll now hand back to Geert to go through some of the definitions that are needed by us all to be able to function well within the planetary boundaries that we have. Geert.
I think I have a very quick final question. Bringing it back to climate change. When we're looking at events, what has the biggest climate impact? Is it your TV media production? Is it your signage or your branding? Is it where your teams are accommodated or infrastructure, transport, or is it goodies and merchandising? Very quickly, to not take too much time, give some points to each of those 6 topics so that we get a feel on where you think is the biggest climate impact at sport events. Okay, I give you 5 more seconds. You can simply click on +10, and then you submit your points. 3, 2, 1. And I think we've got a winner here, which are transport of spectators, which is totally right. Where they come from, how they travel is the biggest impact. So be aware of that sort of things when you organize your event. I won't go into all the details now. We'll certainly come to talk about that later. There are indeed, I think you can roughly see a priority here, which is very common for many events. Infrastructure indeed can play a big role. Temporary can really reduce your impact if you're building specifically for the event. Obviously, it has a lot of impact. Don't underestimate the fact that if your goodies and merchandise are coming from the other side of the globe and have to be flown in, that is a lot of transport as well. So there is also this element to it. But in general, indeed, goodies and merchandising is much more related to the waste, a little bit less to carbon emissions. But the transport of spectators, if there's one thing that you should pay attention to, is probably that one. Okay, thank you so much. I'll stop this one and I'll go back to some of our lovely slides. Let me just share that again, because as we said, there is a definition of sustainability, which is about making sure you meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their needs for organizing events. If you want to have a simple definition, because for some of us this might be too difficult to memorize, think about a triathlon. A triathlon is really talking about 3 different sports that you all need to master: cycling, running, and swimming in order to win the triathlon. And that's also why sustainability has a social element, has an economic element, has an environmental element. If you are extremely strong on your environmental side and you meet all the needs of the environment, but you ignore the other two, or you even ignore one of them, it's like sitting on a stool that has 3 legs and I'll take out one, and you're going to be very unstable. You're going to be a triathlete who's good in swimming and running, but horrible in cycling, for example. It's going to be very difficult to win a race. So sustainability is really finding this balance between those 3 elements, which you see a bit more in detail here. That is to be sustainable as a sport event. And when we zoom in on climate change, we think sport is awesome and sport is very powerful, but the planet doesn't need sport, but sport needs the planet. For a lot of the sports, we are dependent on nature, we are dependent on the climate. For a lot of outdoor sports, it's our playfield. So without the seas, without the mountains, etc., the sport wouldn't exist. And sports who might be played in stadiums, etc., are often also very dependent on that. So this is just to keep in mind that, putting to perspective, we do feel us maybe sometimes like superwoman or superman, but it's us as sports people who really need the sport. And however, there is something which I refer to as sustainability in and through sport, because this is a picture from a journal some time ago. I should look up the exact source, which shows who was the most influential person in society in the early days, like in the early days of the like the first until the 15th century. It was mostly politicians. 50% you were listening to the politicians. If you fast forward to the year 2000, politicians have had an influence, have seen their influence decreasing tremendously from 51% to 7%. If you look at, in this case, soccer players or sports people in general, because here's difficult to read, athlete, tennis player, cyclist, etc., this 50% is completely taken over by sports people. If I add actors and singers as entertainment, you can see that 80% of the influence within society, influencing the opinion, influencing people's behaviors, comes through people working in the entertainment sector. And for those of you who are keen to look for a specific sport, here's a bit more detail between athletes, cyclists, tennis player, or whatsoever. My main point here is that sustainability and its in and through sport are 2 different things. Within sport events, there are needs to be addressed. An event needs to be sustainable and get its house in order, but the powerful bit and the leverage through sport athletes is humongous. It's very, very big, and it can go very far, as you can see here. Climate change, lots of examples, Ingrid.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're all working in sport on the call, so this is it's imperative as well that we understand the risks that climate change are posing on our sports. Obviously, the regions that are most affected, Africa, we have water risk that will affect particularly India, Pakistan, the region that's fed by the Himalayas, and directly on sports events. Here we've shown just a few examples. You have flooding, you have extreme heat where some events cannot take place. We have air pollution, particularly affecting certain countries, certain cities, particularly impactful for endurance sports. And then the mountain, the snow-based sports that are seriously impacted, where we're having to drastically rethink what those sports will look like just in a few years. They're working very much with the mountain-based sports, and we can see even with skiing, the last 8 World Cup races for men have been not taken place due to lack of snow, due to too much snow, due to too much wind, basically to climatic impacts on the sport. So I think just the awareness that we must not ignore the impacts of global warming and all the extreme climatic impacts that it has in all regions of the world, some more than others. And so what we try and do is we work within sustainability, given the impact that sport has globally on behavioral change, the joy it brings, all the benefits of sport that we won't go into today, but that we know we live by, we seek to support, then obviously we're trying to make the events themselves as sustainable as possible. So here we outline just some of the major areas that we look at. So on the questions that were posed before, transport, so getting to the event is where the greatest takes place. Done carbon footprints of many, many events now, and we know that is where approximately 70 to 80%, if not more, of the carbon footprint of an event takes place. However, that is often beyond your scope, as in, how do you, as a sport, as an event, someone working within the event, influence how people get to your event? In Europe, most parts of Europe, we're fortunate we can get around by taking, the train, for example, as opposed to the plane. But when we look at the events themselves, this is some of the areas that we look at where you can take sustainable actions, where you can influence change. So whatever your role is in this sport event, you may be able to influence and becoming more sustainable. There we're looking at water management. Are you working for a sport? Is it an event for golf, for example, for field hockey, for ice hockey, for football? Many of these sports, they use unbelievable amounts of water that maybe are not necessary. You have to measure to understand. So often what we start with is by measuring. What is the event? What is your sport doing at the moment? And then opportunities for reduction. Food and drinks, that's a major one. Obviously, we try to go for zero single-use plastic. That's in the law of most countries or many countries now. So, for example, cutlery should be either you rewash it or that it's compostable. Same with the plates that are used. Try to have no plastic bottles, that you have fountains. So even we have many examples, for example, where a sport event was sponsored by a water or a drink company. Rather than having small plastic bottles, they now have fountains. There are options out there and it stimulates innovation. So food and drinks. Waste management is a major one. This is obviously something you need to work with the local government. They will have their recycling. It's not possible in all countries, but you use the event to push for positive change, to make the change possible. You come and you say, well, it's possible in other countries to do it. Why can't we do it here? And you're trying to influence the change that way. Energy efficiency. This is a big one. Where does your electricity come from? Is it from a diesel generator? Mention was made about the influence of TV and broadcasters. Obviously in sport, we broadcast and they often come in their trucks and they use diesel powered generators. Is it possible that they share those generators? You look at renewable energy generators. It's a whole new business that's coming into play now. Can it be connected to the main electricity sources? And is that powered by renewable energy? Can you put solar panels if you're a sports arena, for example? Product purchasing. So this is the merchandising and all the things. And then travel is a major one. The example we have on the right is from an event that is one of the most recent ones to become certified ISO 2012-1, which is the Sustainable Event Management Standard that we'll explain a little bit later on. And that's where we looked at all the different activities in relation to the ski world championships that took place in Mirabel-Courchevel, which is in France, in February of this year. So there were different parameters that we looked at, the TV production, the parking, the transport, the food and beverage, the waste, all these elements that we'll be going into later. Thank you, Geert. You're on
One
mute.
thing that is interesting here to mention is that the things that are in red are the things that the organizing committee in this case was not directly financing. So the control you have there is much less. Whatever is in blue was financed by the organizers, so the control is much bigger. However, the impact that we calculated on emissions, 70% was coming through the red boxes. So there you see the challenges that you have to face, that, for example, transport of people to your event is something that you don't pay for, so your influence is less, but it's still the biggest element of your carbon footprint. Let's make sure we move forward we were here with, probably with many different people from different countries and nationalities, but there's one language here which is talked sustainability, which is SDG. Ingrid, what does SDG mean?
So we hope you all know what the SDGs are. So they were defined by the United Nations, and basically the 17 goals that all countries, all of us, I'd say even though the countries effectively sign up to them, they have committed to them, we all are responsible in helping achieve them. So the aim is that they'll all be achieved by 2030. So we have 7 years to go, not less, 6 years effectively, to meet these 17 goals. So the first one, for example, is no poverty. We have many, you can see them: healthy well-being. We've got life on land, life below underwater. You've got reduced inequalities. We've got gender equality. We've got partnerships around the goals. So we've got many of these global goals that we're all seeking to achieve. The reality is now many of the sports, they are identifying and thus trying to use their sport to help achieve the SDGs. So many of them are linking specifically with, for example, 13, which is on climate action. So that is specifically looking at trying to reduce your carbon footprint. Within each SDG, you've got targets. They're quite specific, it's quite technical, but we can basically use it as a global framework that's understood around the world, wherever we are, to help improve the situation that we're living in and to reduce our negative impact on the planet. And then, Geert, you have a number of the...
Why do we call it a language? It's because it's a language in the field of sustainability that becomes much more common, also with sponsors and partners that you're working with for your sport events. If you take Heineken here, for example, who clearly have selected some of those blocks, some of those colors, like zero hunger, good health and well-being, as their core areas where they focus on with their sustainability strategy. It's a way where you can connect with your sponsor on the sustainability theme, on specific topics. So that's what I always recommend, is that if you in your sport have certain SDGs, because there's no problem at all in selecting amongst those 17. You don't have to say they're all equally important for me, because every sport in a way is different, has a different influence. But to find connections through the sustainable development goals with your partners, with your government, with your sponsors, etc., and use it as a common framework or a common language to talk about sustainability. That's why we refer to it as a sort of a language that is good to speak when you get involved in these debates. We're gonna skip over to the next topic because time is going really fast, and I hope this sort of introduction has given you a good insight in what we're talking about, what is sustainability, what is it not. Now we go a little bit deeper and we talk about some of the functional areas. And Ingrid started listing them, and I think there's maybe even more that we can put there. In a broad sense, sustainability, as we saw before, has an impact on many functional areas, almost all of the functional areas that you can see in a sport. And for every functional area, there's different elements that are important. We won't go through all of them and in this session, but do feel free to write down one or two of them and ask specific questions if you want to know more about that. But what we want to do, we want to take a couple of minutes to show you a few case studies of projects where Ingrid and I have worked on with the Shift that zoom in on some of these specific elements that you see here. And the first one was related to the Tour de France. You probably all are familiar with this. I think I maybe can say the most iconic cycling race in the world. I'm not going to go into the debate on that one, but they had a stopover in Lausanne, and we worked with the city of Lausanne to really make sure the operational side of the event was as sustainable as possible. So what did we do very concretely? Well, one of the things, as we already mentioned a few times, making sure that the maximum number of people comes by using public transport, bicycle, or whatsoever. So those are often collaborations with your governmental agencies, with your transport provider, with the local train provider, etc., to make sure that, for example, if you come to the event, there's no parking possibility, but there's buses and shuttles that go back and forth. So that's really something where often you need to start early, but especially in countries like Switzerland, where the infrastructure is very rich when it comes to public transport, it's something that you can really push with your events. Second point was really on managing the waste and maximizing circular economy. Circular economy, in a nutshell, it is the traditional model is you buy something, you use it, you throw away whatever you don't use. Circular economy goes in a circle. Whatever you don't use directly goes back into the system as being repurposed, recycled, reused for something else. So you don't throw it away. So making sure you rethink on how do you use certain resources? What is the second life of something after the event? Because the event literally was 2 days. So there's a lot of stuff that comes into Lausanne. And then after 2 days, what do you do with it? Do you just throw it away, or do you kind of repurpose it or recycle it, resell it? There's many opportunities there to think. Food is a big topic, not only for healthy lifestyle, but also when it comes to carbon. Maybe you know, but otherwise you should know that using less meat has a big impact on your carbon emissions, your carbon footprint, so-called. So eating organic food, vegetarian food, easily reduces your emissions per meal with 50 to 70%. So by really pushing that amongst the spectators is something that can really contribute to the event. And again, preferring local food and pushing for local food avoids that food is being shipped from all over the place, and that you support your local economy as well. So there's elements around both healthy and local food that we addressed. Accessibility and inclusion maybe goes beyond the climate side, but really important that people with different abilities are able to attend the event, are able to get to the event, put yourself in a wheelchair, or put yourself, a mother or a father with a baby, in a trottinette. All those situations is something that you need to think of to make sure that someone who is colorblind can still identify where to go, and you don't simply rely on the fact that people need to differentiate different colors. People have hearing problems, who are visually impaired. There's so many different ways where people might have difficulty accessing the event or feeling excluded from the event in a certain way, that by thinking about that, and there's wonderful resources available to different organizations that are specialized in that, to make sure that in events where you've got thousands and thousands of people coming, that often those small groups of people that are excluded for this kind of reasons, that you pay attention to that and you think about that before. A little joke about that, think about the World Championship skiing in a wheelchair, but still the World Championship with whom we work, they did think about it, and they did think about how can we make sure that someone who is in a wheelchair, maybe they had a ski accident even, can still come to the event and enjoy the event. And then last but not least, everything around energy, water, and climate. I think there's many elements there that we can talk about, but the simple fact of we use a lot of helicopters in sport events, flying over the venue, flying over the parcours, flying over the track, etc. Think about that, rethink that, as Ingrid said before, try to find different solutions to make sure you minimize the impact there. Over to you, maybe, Ingrid. ISO 20012-1 and skiing again.
Yep. Thank you, Geert. So I also will use this opportunity to address a question that's come up in the chat. And I encourage you, please put your questions in the chat so then we can directly answer them. So ISO 20012-1, it was developed around London Olympic Games in 2012, which is why the name 2012, and it was the first edition of this ISO standard. So ISO stands for the International Standards Organization. So they are the international organization that develop international standards on many different things, be it hygiene, be it data protection, be it quality standards. There's literally hundreds of standards. And this ISO 20121 has been specifically developed for sustainable event management. So it's not only sports events, it could be cultural, other gatherings of people, basically, any of events. At the moment, the standard is being revised. So a new version of it will be released next year around the time of the Olympic Games in Paris. So it'll be a new version of it. And we are supporting Paris and ISO on the actual revision of this norm. So part of that, and it's linked to the question, thank you very much for the question with regards to the reporting requirements. So when you implement sustainability at an event, you want the world to know about it. So typically you'll do a communication about it. It might be on your website, it might be through social media. Increasingly now, the people that fund you, it might be your government funding, it may be the IOC, it may be your international federation, it may be private sector, they'll want you to do a sustainability report. How have you used the money that you have received to implement the objectives of your organization or your event? So with regards to sustainability, we try to, and so it's linked to the collection of data, you're trying to collect as much information as you can, the good stories and the learnings about the implementation of sustainability. ISO as a norm, it's an event management standard. So it shows you the process to be able to implement sustainability at the event. Starting with engagement of stakeholders. You've got to talk to the people that your event influences and impacts. That could be the local community, could be the athletes, it could be the international federation, it could be, sponsors. You've got to engage your stakeholders. Then you've got to plan, you have to put together a sustainability strategy. You have to identify the issues. So when we went back 3 slides before, when I'd listed a whole lot of issues, they're typical sustainability issues that you may have to address. Every country in the world is a little bit different. We're all different. Some issues, though, are across the board, will be the same. The environmental implications, you've got transport, you've got food and beverage, certain things happen at all events. Human rights implications, I just mentioned it. I'm here at the United Nations at the moment. Big Human Rights and Sport Conference. It's the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We need to think of human rights. For example, is there no abuses occurring at your event? Do you have reporting frameworks in place? So it may be that or child labor, for example, in the making of the goodies or the uniforms to avoid child labor, how do you check that there is no child labor in the making of the uniforms that you use at your event? So that's a human rights concern. You put it as part of the issues that you're addressing as part of ISO 20121. And then you have operational plans, you implement, you check, and there's a whole process around it. I won't go into too much detail. What I'm getting to is an answering to this question. So as part of the annex to this new revised ISO 20121, we have a framework on sustainability reporting. It's a very simple framework for reporting on sustainability. The mention is also made with regards to the EU Green Deal. There's a new EU directive that is coming into force very soon on sustainability reporting. For the moment, it's only for large companies, multi-million-dollar, over 250 employees. So very few sports organizations will be implicated. And the reality is most of the international federations, even the IOC, FIFA, the big ones are actually Swiss associations. So legally there's not, but ethically there will be, and there will be the pressure from the sponsors to report on sustainability. So yes, we will need to report, and we should report as part of our transparency and good governance as sports organization and sports events. So the guidelines, they are coming, they're in process. We're waiting for the final guidance, and then we'll adapt and develop sport-specific guidelines. So what, for example, we did in every sport event, we highly encourage them to do for every event is you identify your priority areas. So for example, we use the ski championships. It's a recent event that was certified ISO, where they looked at 4 big sectors. So it's in French, I recognize that, but you're looking at, they had looked at the mountains, preserving the mountains and how fragile it is, trying to organize a responsible event that looked after the local communities and the actors in the region, ensuring that the event was fun as well, inclusive, accessible, and then ensuring that there was a positive legacy in relation to the event. So under those 4 pillars that we can see on the screen in front of us, then we had targets. So similar, just been presented by Geert with regard to the Tour de France, where there was a specific objective, and under that you have a specific target. Basically, for every event, you're trying to identify targets against which then you track implementation, you do the reporting, and that goes into the report at the end. Thank you, Geert. We can move on, because otherwise I'll get distracted and talk for too long. Yeah, so this was just so basically the, do you want to do golf?
No, I think because we are kind of coming towards like almost 50 here, so I want to kind of fast forward a little bit, and we can come back on some of this. This is just in a very nutshell. This is another event in a golf event that took place recently, with whom we've worked, where we've addressed similar kind of operational issues. And here you see an example of like, okay, how do you kind of move around such a beautiful site when you are have reduced mobility? A question actually, and I just want to touch on this very briefly, that came up in the chat from Fast80. Is about communication and signage, for example. There's 2 things on signage. One is indeed like the bins, and a very simple answer there is try to use icons and symbols that people recognize, so that you don't have all the language issues to say like, okay, have clear indication on what to do and where to do, where for people to put waste, etc. When it goes to the bigger topic of signage, which I just wanted to touch on briefly here, which is really important to make sure you get out of your little sustainability bubble. This is a project we did with the Paris Olympics, where we literally looked across departmental. I think we had 12 functional areas involved, understanding how they use signage, when they sign contracts, what they put in contracts, what the requirements are from sponsors, etc., and taking that entire picture into account, and then come with proposals that actually meet the needs of your sponsorship department, meet the needs of your legal department, meet the needs of your operational department, instead of thinking about the most sustainable solution, but which is probably wonderful from an ecological point of view, but it doesn't deliver the right quality for that you have agreed on with your sponsors, for example. So having this cross-departmental approach to many of those topics, and signage is a perfect example, because it goes from design to sponsors and to legal and back, to make sure that when you look at this kind of topics, you do really address it cross-departmental. And something that we did here literally is having these meetings with all these functional areas and providing them concrete tools, and making sure you get it in the contract of the ones who supply your products, who supply your signage, because if it's not in your contract, it's very difficult to go back to them and request from them to do certain things or to not do certain things. So this is another example that was very much like on a specific topic, but cross-departmental, that I just wanted to highlight. But communicating about sustainability, whether it's with your suppliers, with your fans, with your athletes, is a massive topic, is a really important topic, but it's not very easy, but it's really important. It's maybe one of the barriers that people do see. So Ming, I maybe want to hand back to you, because we want to discuss a little bit on some of the questions that you might have who are on the call, or some of the barriers, some of the challenges that you face when you talk about sustainability in your respective organization. Ming?
Your last slide was on perceived barriers, and I think that's a great thing to touch upon. And I'm going to bring up a topic that probably everyone has on their mind, but isn't always so nice to talk about, which is cost. Cost is one of the foremost concerns that we often hear about with regards to anything really, no less sustainability. And in fact, you have shown us a very clear framework, and thank you for this guideline and perhaps even language for defining and understanding sustainability. So based on this, my next question should really be, what is the cost of not implementing sustainability practices, standards, and commitments? But that said, perhaps you and Ingrid could share a little bit on the cost or the cost benefits, in fact, of implementing these practices.
Yeah, that's always the interesting question. I'll pick off, and Ingrid, you can add and complement. I do remember I was talking to a big international sport federation some years ago, and the leader of the organization told me I'm responsible for my sport, not to save the world, not to save the climate. Where I was able to go back to him with some numbers and tell him, like, if you do this reusable of equipment and signage, you can actually save 65,000 euros, was exactly the amount that I had been able to verify with the finance department. And all of a sudden we had a conversation, and he said, okay, now we're talking, because this is actually a significant amount for my sport. So it is really important that you do tie these things to the ultimate goal of your event, of your sport, to grow your sport, to have a wonderful event, and that you don't simply ignore and say, like, well, you should make money for this because it's important to do it. That will be a really difficult one to sell. So do make this connection as much as you can. What does it cost and what does it bring? The simple answer is it depends on a lot of things, but there's a lot of cost saving that you can do. There are initial setup costs. Quite often still sustainable solutions. Come back to signage. Signage, the cheapest signage is not the most sustainable one. Buying products in certain low-cost countries is still maybe the cheapest solution. So there is a certain cost related to sustainability, period, that you should need to be very clear about. However, if you do other things and you reduce the amount of resources that you need. For example, you reuse signage. You don't buy plastic bottles, which cost 50 centimes per bottle. You save a lot of money. You buy less resources, so there's less things to be thrown away. You don't want to know how many materials are being thrown away after each sport event. That simply, if you think about it before, maybe you shouldn't have bought them. It is an exercise we did with the Paris Olympics, where actually we looked right at the start by listing what are all the resources that are needed for the Olympic Games, and can we save there so that you don't have so much waste at the end. So you can make a lot of cost saving through sustainable manners. Secondly, there are numerous examples and many opportunities that you can either get funding through governments to put in place certain sustainability practices so you can get new revenue sources. And my colleague Anne-Cécile Turner, who worked with the Ocean Race, is probably one of the best examples. You can create interest with either existing or entirely new sponsors to come on board, and as a way also to generate new revenue. So I think you should also think about it as an opportunity to touch on new revenue sources. Again, it comes back to something that Ingrid said. If you do that, make sure you are credible, you have your facts right, and you don't just bluff away, because then it can be very costly and very dangerous to do that. But in summary, it does cost money. There is investment cost to be made. That's something and that depends, of course, for a small sport event compared to a big sport event, is very different. But do set it off against the potential cost saving or new revenue that you can generate through this. Ingrid, any additional thoughts?
Thank you, Geert. I'll just add one point where massive cost savings can be made. If you are a sports organization, it's on the transport. So typically our presidents, council members, certain dignitaries within sport would travel around the world business class. When they are conscious that a business flight is about 4 times more carbon emissions, the cost by taking less flights, by taking economy as well, you're automatically saving thousands of 100,000. So that's a no-brainer. And it's a behavioral change, though. It's not always easy. You know, we've worked with the IOC officials at the highest level for them to take public transport now rather than having private cars, not always taking, you know, business or first class even, that it becomes the norm and you're actually doing good for the planet and you're saving money. So on the transport one, I think that's something that's becoming the norm and where clear costs can be made. Then on the events themselves as well, it's reduction. We're all talking about less. So the more precise you can, food, for example, the number of meals that are needed, you use sustainability as the excuse. Maybe you do run out, you know, or you have other options, you know, but you're really being very, very precise on the number of things, not having dates, for example, on any clothing. So, for example, most of the sports now, you have one uniform across the board, which is the same that's used by everybody. Don't put dates on signage, don't put dates on uniforms, and then they can be reused. Massive savings that are possible. And I think with regards to why do it, you just have to. You have no choice now. We are over when you think of the world and the planetary boundaries, like with regards to so many factors, we're overstretching. The planet is warming too quickly. So we really have to make our best effort. So it's an ethical debate now forced by legislation. The laws will make you change. But as sports, we should also be, you know, really leading, showing that it's possible to do an event, a modest event, really just toning things down. And there we're doing good for the planet and for the people that we serve. Thank you. Ming, over to you.
Thank you very much, both. Thank you very much, both, and I'm glad that we are taking the time, even though we are very close to being over, to address this, because it is very important. I do have two questions. One from the floor, from Fa, who asks, sometimes I feel that the tools, signage, images for each waste stream are in place, but we lack communication. That, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, you did? Oh, yes. Fantastic.
Yeah,
Thank
I think it was
Geert.
It was very much just clear signage, for example, on waste bins, to use icons, to use pictures. For example, if you've got compost, for example, not all countries you have or events would have composting. So for things that can be used for compost, you might have PET, you might have glass, you might have paper, you might have other. For example, in France, they have 7 streams. So you often have 7. In many countries, it might be 3. You might have paper, normal waste, and glass. Typically, it would be 3 streams, but you just need clear pictures with icons for the waste, and make sure that afterwards, when it's collected, so that's often volunteers. So training your volunteers that when they collect the waste bins at the end of the day or throughout the day, it goes into the correct bins at the end of the day, and that the trucks then come and pick it up. Then it goes actually to the recycling. So it's looking through the whole chain of waste. Waste management in itself is one of the major areas of an event, but something that when most, for example, we spoke about the golf, Omega Golf, it was in a slide a wee while back. Basically, there's no waste at the end now. If your food is measured correctly, you have wine bottles, so glass is something, but really trying to reduce on every other dimension of an event. Zero waste is the goal.
Yeah, just a quick one to add there on the waste management. This was at the Olympic Games in Rio, where they had several waste pickers program, where actually there were local community groups who could go into all the waste and take out all the metals, for example, that they would afterwards resell. And another group would come in and would take out all the plastic, they would resell. Some would take out all the foam, they would resell. Because a lot of those raw materials, they can be resold in significant quantities. You only get a few euros probably per kilo, but there was 92%, I remember, of all the waste was actually being taken out by these different organizations and resold again. So there was very little waste left over. So it's about thinking also differently about waste. A lot of the things that we throw away that we consider waste, they still have value for other purposes, for other people. So making sure that you give it a second life as much as possible. That is something, just I think, concept of waste you need to change a little bit, and then the point on icons remains, but rethink waste. I would say in your sport events, because it has a lot of value.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, both. And finally, if we could just give a little space for addressing greenwashing. Many of us here do believe, I hope, in the goodness of sports and the benefits that sports can bring to us, not only in personal health, but in the health of society and much more. You did also address an important point right at the beginning of your presentation, which is that the planet doesn't need sport, but sport needs the planet. And here is this potential moral dilemma that I wanted to bring up, that sports events are an addition. They add to consumption and they add to waste in all of the components, whether it's production, filming, travel, etc. So viewed from this perspective, is it audacious to claim that sport events can actually be sustainable? Or perhaps to be a little softer on that, how do we actually avoid greenwashing events? How do we avoid patting ourselves on the back for ticking check boxes or having the right sort of marketing?
That's
quite a loaded question. I recognize that.
It's a very loaded question. No, it's a very pertinent question. Maybe I'll start and then I'll hand over to Geert. So basically, we need to think of the calendar. I think that's a major, but that's at the international level, trying to compete locally as much as possible, trying to reduce the need to take the plane. So that's a fundamental ethical question that we haven't yet addressed in great detail, I'd say, at the international level, really looking at, do we need all of these events to ensure, recognizing that the role of especially elite athletes is phenomenal with regards to behavioral change. You know, we shared the diagram of the role of a soccer player, of these athletes in influencing change. That is undeniable. So we have to ensure we cannot destroy sport. It has too many good aspects, but the proliferation of events, you know, the number of different events, are they all necessary? That is something we need to question. We need to fundamentally question. You know, we try to avoid taking the plane as much as possible. Really, you have to be ethically moved now. Like it's something we have to be question. Greenwashing, it's legal. So basically, if you're going to say something that you're not doing in reality, you can get fined for it, and heavily fined. So now greenwashing is becoming part of the law in many countries, and we even saw FIFA were fined with regards to their announcements on their carbon footprint with the Qatar World Cup. So we have to be very, very cautious, which is why the data that's collected, so the sustainability reporting that you do, that is not purely for communication purposes, but it's to track progress, it's to report on actually what you're doing. So yes, we must not use sports events to greenwash or sport wash in any way yet.
Yeah, I should maybe come back to the two things, sustainability in sport and through sport. I think through sport, there's a lot of power by making sure you use the voice and the power of sport to address some of the societal issues. That's a different topic, making sure you have the right messaging. When it comes to our actual events, the operational side, I maybe kind of leave it with 2-3 words: reduce, rethink, and recover. Firstly, reduce. We need to become more sober. We need to do less. We need to do less flying, less consumption. There's in many cases, there's like all these additional elements that we bring into events. We need to make things smaller, more modest, etc. So reduce as much as you can on your consumption of goods, on your carbon footprint, on your impact on the climate, etc. So that's your first step. Second step is rethink. Ingrid touched on it with calendar. There's elements that if you want to host sport events, you somehow have to rethink them and say, can we do things differently than we've done in the last 100 years in order to do them more efficiently, in order to make sure our impact is less. So rethink how you've done it and make sure that, this is the tough part, you are able to break with some of the habits, with some of the traditions that might have been ingrained in the sport, but rethink how you organize sport events. And then if you've done those two things, there's always going to be elements like waste, like emissions, etc., that will come out of your event. Coming on greenwashing, firstly, make sure you know them. So there's measurement that you can quantify them. You can say, this is the impact of my event, and I know what it is, and I can actually show you the numbers, so you're reliable. make sure you measure it, and then to make sure you look into how you can recover damage that you do through your event, whether that is to when it's in biodiversity, which is damaged through the fact that you come there with your event, where can you help to recover that? When it comes to emissions, where can you look into compensating things so that you can go there? So try to look into recovering. How can you repurpose, recycle some of the things that are coming out of your event? So reduce first, rethink how you organize your events, and then we will always have an impact on the climate through our events. So look into how you can help recover those aspects. And I think if you do those things in a transparent way, based upon facts, not ignoring the fact that you do have a negative impact on the climate, but you also can make things change to sport that politicians and scientists, they cannot do, I think you can have a very reliable story to the audience. I hope that gives a bit of an insight, but it's a big debate, to make sure that it's a fine line to walk as well for event organizers, because especially those who do good things are often very sensitive in not talking too much about it. So it is a very fine line to walk.
Thank you very, very much. I think those 3 points, reduce, rethink, and recover, it's a really, really good way to help us anchor thinking about the way forward as well. And I recognize there's so much more that we can talk about sustainability, and I hope that we'll have an opportunity to speak together once again with our Ignites family as well, and our friends out there, about more details on sustainability, more opportunities for looking at case studies so that we can learn from best practices. So thank you both so very, very much, and for being so generous with your knowledge and for your passion on this topic as well.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to address you.
Thank you very much, Ming and Ingrid and Geert, for joining us in this third session of the Ignite Summit. It was really insightful. I think the 3 points that Geert mentioned on the last, the reduce, rethink, and recover, it was a perfect closure. With this, I thank everybody for joining us again today. Once again, big thank you to our friends at the Shift, Geert and Ingrid.